The year was 1960, and love had a sound. The quiet hum of the radio in my apartment, the steady rhythm of Thomas's boots against the wooden floor, and the soft laughter that filled the room when he looked at me. I was Jerry Whitmore, a man in my late 20s, once foolishly in love, and engaged to the bravest man I'd ever known, Sergeant Thomas Reed. Thomas had just returned from war, his broad shoulders still bore the weight of duty, his eyes haunted by things I couldn't imagine. Yet when he smiled at me, I thought all the world's wounds could heal. He used to say, "Jerry, you're my peace after the storm." I believed him. God, I truly did. When he told me about Edward, the man who saved his life, I was grateful too. "He took the bullet meant for me," Thomas said one evening, staring into the fire. "I owe his family everything. I never thought that debt would be the thing that destroyed us." When John, Edward's younger brother, came to stay with us, he seemed harmless at first, delicate, with soft brown curls and eyes that always looked misty with sorrow. He played the role of the fragile younger brother perfectly. But behind that timid smile I saw something darker: envy. John would often act sickly whenever Thomas and I were together, that he'd stumble into the room coughing just as Thomas leaned in to kiss me. "Thomas," he'd whisper faintly, I don't feel well." Thomas would rush to his side instantly, forgetting me mid-kiss. Every time it happened, a piece of my heart cracked a little more. At first I tried to be kind. I brought John tea, blankets, and even read him stories when Thomas was away. But the more I gave, the more he took. Soon he began spreading whispers, small, poisonous things that reached Thomas's ears. "Jerry was out last night. I saw him talking to another man. Jerry said the army is a waste of lives. Jerry doesn't respect what you've been through, Thomas." "What?" "All of them." But Thomas began to believe him. I noticed it in the way his hand would withdraw from mine too quickly, or how he'd avoid my eyes when I asked what was wrong. Then came the first argument, loud, heated, and painful. "Do you think I'd ever betray you?" I shouted through tears. Thomas's jaw tightened. "I don't know what to think anymore, Jerry." Behind him, I saw John standing in the hallway, his expression innocent, except for the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. That night I cried until dawn. Still, I hoped that our wedding day would heal everything. I told myself love would win. But love, it can be cruel. The day of our wedding was overcast, the kind of gray that made everything feel like a bad omen. I stood before the mirror in my white suit, heart pounding, eyes bright with nervous hope. Thomas was supposed to meet me at the church at 4. At 3:50, a messenger came running, breathless. "Thomas can't come," he said. "It's John, he's in critical condition." My stomach dropped. "What?" He collapsed. "He's asking for Thomas." I rushed outside just in time to see Thomas speeding away in his car, without even looking back. I waited at the altar for hours. The candles burned low. Guests whispered. The rain began to fall. But he never came back. By evening I stood alone in the empty church. My suit was soaked with rain, my hair plastered to my forehead, tears blending with the water streaming down my face. I walked home through the storm, every step heavier than the last. Cars passed by, headlights blinding through the downpour. I didn't care. I wanted it all to end. Then a blinding flash, screeching tires, pain, silence. As my body hit the cold pavement, I heard faint laughter, John's voice echoing like a ghost. He had ordered it. I knew that he wanted me gone. Blood filled my mouth as I looked up at the dark sky. My heart broke not just from betrayal, but from the cruel twist of fate that let evil win. In that final breath, I whispered to the heavens, "If there's mercy left for me, let me return. Let me make them pay." Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in my room, the same room where I'd chosen my wedding suit weeks before. The air smelled of fresh roses, the ones Thomas bought me for our engagement. My hands were unscarred. My heart was still beating fast, but not from pain. I was alive. And the calendar on the wall read May 4th, 1960. My breath hitched. This was before the wedding. Before everything fell apart. I stumbled to the mirror. The reflection staring back was young, whole, untouched by tragedy. I pressed my hand against my cheek and laughed, then sobbed, then laughed again. "I'm back," I whispered. "I'm really back." This time I swore I wouldn't be the naive fool who let love blind him. This time I'd play the game better than they ever could. I remembered everything, every lie, every betrayal, every tear, and I would make them pay. But fate has its own sense of irony. That very day, while walking through the military camp to deliver a message to Thomas, I met a man whose name would change everything: General Francis Alcott. He was a legend. The youngest general in the army, respected and feared in equal measure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp eyes that could silence an entire room. When he looked at me it felt like time stopped. "Ah, you must be Sergeant Reed's fiancé," he said, voice low and commanding. I nodded, startled. "Why yes, sir. Jerry Whitmore." He smiled faintly, a rare expression on his stoic face. "I've heard of you." I didn't know then that my revenge would soon intertwine with his fate. Francis was different from Thomas. Where Thomas was impulsive and emotional, Francis was composed and thoughtful. He carried himself like a man who knew his worth, and for some reason, he saw something in me that Thomas had long forgotten. We began to talk often. He'd invite me to the camp for tea under the guise of checking morale. Sometimes he'd just listen, other times he'd share his thoughts about life and war. Slowly I began to realize something terrifying. Francis was falling for me. And maybe, part of me was falling too. Days bled into weeks and I lived them with a newfound purpose. Each sunrise felt like a second chance, not just at life but at control. This time I wasn't going to be the helpless lover waiting to be abandoned. This time I would direct the play myself. Thomas came home from duty earlier than expected. When he walked through the door, that familiar warmth filled the room again, but I no longer melted under his gaze. His embrace felt shallow, his kisses mechanical. Perhaps I was the only one who noticed that his thoughts were already drifting elsewhere, to John. He spoke about him too often, asked about him too much. I smiled through it all, pretending ignorance, though inside a storm brewed quietly. One evening, I visited the camp again, under the pretense of bringing Thomas his lunch. But instead I found General Francis Alcott standing by the training field, sleeves rolled up, watching his men spar. The late afternoon light kissed his features, sharp, commanding, yet softened by a quiet melancholy. When his eyes found me, his expression changed instantly, from cold to warm, from soldier to man. "Jerry," he said with that low velvety voice, "you've been visiting often." I smiled, feigning innocence. "Perhaps it's your tea that keeps me coming back, General?" He chuckled softly, that rare smile tugging at his lips. "Then I'll have to make sure you never run out of tea." He invited me to his office again. The air between us always felt thick, not uncomfortable but charged, as if something unspoken hung between every glance, every silence. He poured the tea himself this time, his hands brushing mine when he handed me the cup. My heart betrayed me with how fast it began to beat. "Tell me," he said suddenly, leaning against his desk, "what does a man like you see in someone like Sergeant Reed?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask?" Francis's gaze was unwavering. "Because when I look at you, Jerry, I see someone who deserves more than what he's given. You wear strength like a second skin, yet you hide behind fragility to keep others comfortable." I stared at him, stunned, because that was exactly what I'd been doing. Pretending to be gentle. Pretending to be naive. Pretending not to see how Thomas was drifting away. Francis saw through me effortlessly, and something about that made me tremble. "You think too highly of me, General," I murmured. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel his breath against my skin. "No," he said, voice softer now. "I think just enough." The air between us grew still. The clock ticked. The faint scent of sandalwood and ink filled the room. And then, before I could say anything, he reached up, his hand brushing the side of my face. "Jerry," he whispered, "if I'm overstepping?" I didn't let him finish. I leaned in first. Our lips met, slow, uncertain, and yet devastatingly deep. His mouth was warm, his touch steady as his hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer. It wasn't the desperate kind of kiss Thomas used to give me, it was deliberate, reverent, as if Francis feared I might shatter if he moved too fast. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless. "Forgive me," I whispered, though I didn't mean it. He smiled faintly. "I should be the one asking forgiveness." The days that followed were a quiet blur of tension and stolen glances. Whenever Thomas was near, I played my role perfectly, the devoted fiancé, the gentle lover. But at night, my thoughts betrayed me, circling back to the General's steady eyes and the warmth of his hand. Francis and I met again in the garden behind his quarters. The moon hung low, silvering the edges of the leaves. He was waiting for me, coat unbuttoned, the faintest smile on his lips. "You shouldn't be here," I said softly. He took a slow step forward. "And yet you came." When he reached for me this time, I didn't resist. His fingers traced the side of my jaw, then the curve of my lips, and the air seemed to hum around us. The kiss that followed was deeper, more desperate, the kind that left me trembling, my hands gripping his uniform like it was the only thing anchoring me to earth. His lips trailed down my neck, stopping at the hollow of my throat. I felt his breath there, warm and uneven. Tell me to stop, he murmured. I can't, I breathed. I don't want you to. The world fell silent except for the sound of our hearts beating. It was the kind of intimacy that wasn't about flesh. It was about claiming, understanding, surrendering. When he pulled me close and held me against his chest, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just using him for revenge anymore. He had become the calm after my storm. The day of the wedding came faster than I expected, and just like before, the sky turned gray, the air thick with the promise of rain. Everything was the same. The flowers, the guests, the faint sound of thunder in the distance. But this time I was different. I already knew what was coming. As the ceremony began, Thomas looked nervous. He kept glancing at the church doors, waiting. And I knew why, because soon someone would come running. And then it happened. A soldier rushed in, shouting, "John's collapsed. He's critical." Thomas's eyes widened. He turned to me and I smiled. "Go," I said gently. "He needs you." He hesitated only for a second before leaving, just as before. But this time he didn't take my heart with him. The guests whispered in confusion as the rain began to pour outside. I stood there in silence, watching the door close behind Thomas. And then, from the back of the church, General Francis Alcott stepped forward. His uniform was immaculate, his expression unreadable. He walked straight to me, his eyes never leaving mine. "If that man can abandon you so easily," he said softly, "then let me be the one who stays." Before I could speak, he reached for my hand, and in front of everyone, before the altar that was meant for another, he said, "I will take care of him. From this day, no harm will touch him while I breathe." The priest hesitated, uncertain, but I only nodded. And just like that, under the heavy rain and whispers of the crowd, I married the general. Francis's hand was warm and steady as he slid the ring onto my finger. He leaned in and kissed me, slow, certain, sealing not just a vow but a promise. This time, it wasn't despair that filled me. It was victory, and something dangerously close to love. As the church bells rang, the storm outside finally broke, but inside I felt the first calm I'd known in years. The rain did not stop for 2 days after the wedding. The papers called it a storm of coincidence, but I knew better. It was the sky washing away the past. Francis and I stayed inside his estate on the outskirts of town, a vast old mansion that smelled faintly of cedar and gunpowder. The servants spoke in hushed tones. They had never seen the general bring anyone home before, much less a new spouse. He treated me with quiet reverence. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations for the sudden marriage. He only said, "You looked alone. I couldn't let you stay that way." Sometimes I caught him studying me, as though trying to read the secrets I kept behind every polite smile. I would look away, afraid he might see too much. On the third night, the rain softened into a mist. I found him in his study, jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. The lamplight traced the strong lines of his arms and the scar that crossed his collarbone. He was staring at a map, but his thoughts were elsewhere. "Can't sleep?" I asked. He looked up, surprised but pleased. "Neither can you." I stepped closer. "It feels strange, being someone's husband overnight." Francis gave a quiet laugh. "It feels stranger to be a husband overnight and realize you want to be one." The room grew still. His words lingered between us like heat. When I moved to pour him tea, he caught my wrist gently. "Jerry," he said, "tell me something honest." I met his eyes. "What do you want to know? Was this marriage for love, or for refuge?" The question sliced through me. I wanted to lie, to say it was love, but my lips trembled with the weight of truth. "It was both," I whispered. "At first refuge, but now, I don't know anymore." He rose from the chair, closing the distance between us. His hand found my cheek. His thumb brushed away the nervous tears that had gathered there. "Then let's find out together," he murmured. He bent his head and our mouths met, slowly, carefully, as if we were discovering the rhythm of something new. The kiss deepened until the world outside ceased to exist. His hands rested at my waist, firm but gentle. Mine curled against his chest, feeling the steady pulse beneath my fingertips. Francis began loosening his tie, his eyes darkening with desire. "And now, I intend to spend the rest of the night showing my husband exactly how much I want him." He crossed to me and began unbuttoning my shirt with deliberate slowness, his fingers brushing against my skin with each button he freed. I shivered despite the warm evening. "Cold?" Francis murmured, a smile playing at his lips. "You know I'm not." "Then why are you shaking?" "Because I want you. Because I can hardly believe this is real." Francis pushed my shirt off my shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. "It's real, Jerry. I'm real. This He pulled me flush against him, letting me feel his arousal, is very real. I reached up and kissed him hungrily, pouring 2 years of loneliness and longing into it. Francis responded with equal fervor, his hands roaming over my body, claiming every inch of me. We stumbled toward the bedroom, shedding clothes as we went. By the time we reached the bed, we were both naked, our bodies pressing together skin to skin. Francis laid me down on the bed and knelt over me, his eyes drinking in the sight. "You're so beautiful," he said reverently. "Every inch of you." He lowered his head and began kissing a trail down my chest, his tongue swirling around one nipple before moving to the other. I arched into his touch, my hands fisting in his hair. "Francis, please?" "Please what?" He looked up at me, his eyes wicked. "Tell me what you want, husband." "You. I want you. All of you." "You have me," he promised. "You'll always have me." He continued his exploration, kissing and licking his way down my stomach, my hip bones, my inner thighs. When he finally took me in his mouth, I cried out, overwhelmed by the sensation. Francis was thorough and attentive, learning exactly what made me gasp and moan. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, he pulled back. He reached for the oil he'd thoughtfully brought, warming it in his hands before slowly, carefully preparing me. "Tell me if it's too much," he said softly. "It's perfect. You're perfect." When he finally entered me, we both groaned at the feeling. Francis moved slowly at first, letting me adjust, his eyes locked on mine. "I love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "God, Jerry, I love you so much." "I love you too," I gasped as he began to move faster, deeper. "Francis, I love you." We moved together in perfect rhythm, our bodies knowing instinctively how to please each other. Francis whispered words of love and devotion against my skin, told me how good I felt, how perfect we were together. When my release finally crashed over me, I cried out Francis's name like a prayer. He followed moments later, burying his face in my neck as he shuddered through his own climax. Afterward, we lay tangled together, both breathing heavily, our bodies slick with sweat. That was... I couldn't find words. "Incredible," Francis finished. "Perfect. Everything I've ever wanted." He pulled me close and I rested my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat gradually slow. "Francis, you're the first man who ever saw me." He smiled, soft, disbelieving, and kissed me again. This time it was fiercer, like two storms colliding and yet still tender. His warmth surrounded me, and in that embrace, vengeance briefly gave way to peace. A week later, the peace shattered. John had been taken into custody after soldiers intercepted a telegram ordering another accident. I wasn't surprised. I had prepared for it. The trap had been laid from the moment I returned. Francis insisted I remain inside while he conducted the interrogation himself. But I couldn't resist listening from the corridor. John's voice, trembling yet venomous, spilled everything: the fabricated illness, the lies whispered into Thomas's ear, even the order to hit me with the car. "He deserved it," John shouted. "He took everything from me, Thomas's attention, his affection. He made me invisible." Thomas was there too. I heard his sharp intake of breath, the sound of disbelief breaking into guilt. Later that evening, Thomas came to the estate to see me. That he looked older, eyes hollow, uniform wrinkled, pride broken. "Jerry," he began, I know I can't undo what I did. But you have to believe me, I was blind." I stared at him for a long time. "You were not blind, Thomas. You just chose not to see." He fell silent. The rain started again outside, gentle this time, almost merciful. "Do you love him?" he asked finally, nodding toward Francis's silhouette in the next room. I took a slow breath. I didn't plan to. But yes, I do. Thomas swallowed hard and bowed his head. "Then I'll pray he never hurts you the way I did." For the first time I felt no anger, only release. The past had ended where forgiveness began. That night, Francis found me on the balcony, rain glistening on my hair. He wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and drew me back against his chest. "It's over," he said. "John will face trial. Reed has resigned. You're free now." "Free?" I repeated, tasting the word. It felt fragile, like a new beginning. He turned me to face him. "What do you want now, Jerry?" I looked into his eyes, those steady gray eyes that had seen both war and peace, and answered honestly, "You. But not because you saved me. Because you stayed." His hand rose to my face again, tracing the curve of my jaw, the corner of my lips. "Then let me keep staying." I smiled through tears. "For as long as you'll have me." He kissed me once more, long and unhurried. The world blurred around us. The hiss of rain, the faint crackle of the fireplace, the heartbeat I could feel beneath his palm. When he lifted me into his arms and carried me inside, it wasn't passion alone, it was devotion. We moved like two people finding a home in each other. His touch was careful, mine searching, both of us learning the language of closeness anew. When we finally rested, tangled in warmth and moonlight, he whispered, "You don't have to be strong tonight." And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I let myself be soft. Spring came early the next year. The war was finally over, and so was mine. Francis and I tended a small garden behind the estate. He was terrible with flowers but insisted on planting them anyway because, as he said, they make you smile. Sometimes, when the wind was quiet, I would hear the church bells from the town below. Once they had tolled for a wedding that ended in tragedy. Now they sounded like laughter, like the promise of a new life I had fought so hard to earn. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Francis pulled me close and kissed the top of my head. "Still thinking?" he asked. "Just remembering," I said. "I used to ask the heavens why they let me suffer. Now I think they only wanted me to find you." He chuckled softly. "Then I'll have to thank them for their cruelty." We laughed, and I leaned into him, feeling his heartbeat steady and real against mine. The scent of lilacs filled the air, the sky painted in gold and violet. In that moment, I realized my revenge had transformed into something far greater. Redemption, and the man who had been my shield had become my heart.